Alrighty, so we are going to review your test client today. For whoever is doing this work in the future, this is your chance to really understand if the new user has grasped everything that they saw in the new user training. It's an opportunity to catch errors early on rather than after they've accumulated, entering a bunch of real client information. So super important to use this time to sort of nitpick just to make sure everything has really been solidified. Because the new user training really focuses on the coordinated entry workflow, this is also a time where you're going to look at any other EDA mode or program that they're going to be entering data into. So after you go through the coordinated entry test client they entered, you'll sort of circle back and frame that into the real work and role that they are working in. So with all that being said, Philip, thank you for being one of the people who I'm using as a guinea pig for this process. So I'm going to share my screen and we are going to go through the test client that you entered. Give me one sec. Okay. So as the person going through this with new users, I always shadow that person. So I'm going to shadow Philip in this instance. And I always prefer to go into the actual EDA mode of the entry. And I do recommend that new users and users that they actually have the EDA mode selected for any data that they're viewing. What we have found is that even though we have data sharing, there are some instances where you can see more. And so it's important that you always have the program EDA mode set of the client's information you want to look at. Okay, so now we're going to actually find your client. Philip, I love that you used Mario Lopez. So here we go. We're going to review Mario Lopez test information. So at this point, I will usually tell users that they can go ahead and set a backdate mode if they want to, or in this case, because I don't plan to actually add any information at all, I'm not going to have a backdate mode set. If that's confusing for users, I recommend that they can go ahead and have that anyways. It just needs to reflect the date that information was collected, regardless of, what role you're doing in HMAS. Okay, Philip, so just like you entered data, we're going to review the same information. So I'm going to skip over the summary tab since it really is just reflecting all of the data in these tabs. And I'm going to start in the client profile tab. Please stop me if you have any questions or if anything didn't feel straightforward, but I'm going to be sort of looking for anything that needs help in the future. So starting from the top and working our way to the bottom, this here looks great, the client record and the client demographics. This all looks complete and great. I have no feedback here. For whoever's reviewing this information, you're really just looking for things that aren't filled in, or if something looks odd. One common thing that'll happen is that people will put the same answer in the secondary option, and then you can remind them that that's really only if there is a secondary race that's been reported. Contact information, just like in the new user training, it's really important to sort of focus on this just to make sure, because this is oftentimes our only way to contact clients if they're referred through coordinated entry, that people really know how to enter information and keep it updated. This all looks great. The emergency contact section, this as a reminder is just for if the client identified someone they want to be here, so it's not a required field, but helpful if for whatever reason their contact information is not working or in the instance that there is a true emergency. Client notes, in this case, this was a test client, so no biggie, but I always re-emphasize the importance of the client notes This is really maybe one of the most important collaborative tools that we have. This is how we provide more context to the data elements that we've entered. So in here, you would want to offer as much information as you can about the scenario. You'd want to make sure to include things like where the client is currently staying, maybe if there are any specific housing goals that the client is working towards, and then if there are any barriers to working towards those goals. Those are good. That's a good sort of starting point for client notes. And then, as always, make sure that you are entering who you are and ending with the agency you work at. And then file attachments, again, fake client, so no worries. But the file attachments, you'd want to add any documents that you can that will eventually be needed or important. Birth certificate, social security card, ID, proof of income, anything else that could eventually be needed for mainstream resources. And then up at the top, if you have a photo and the client is comfortable with that, you'd want to add that too. That's super helpful for care coordination meetings and also for the WeGo bus card. Philip, any questions about anything from this tab?
Your client contact information, where's that street outreach? We're just putting where your where we're
Philip, your audio is so I can't hear you. I'm so sorry. Your audio is cutting in and out. You can use the chat box, or if you want to call in on your phone, that will be the most reliable connection. And if you want to do that, you'll click the audio box in the top left corner of your screen and click change audio or something like that, and then click the call in feature. I see that you, okay, great. We'll give you a sec to, do we just put the location for where we are entering the information? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking here. I heard that you said contact information earlier. Is it this? So I think that you're referring to this street outreach area of town. Yes, Philip, this is where if you were meeting the person in an encampment and they were in one of these parts of town, you would use this to sort of identify the location, the part of town that they're in. Okay, sorry. Chantel and Tej, if you could let me know if any more chats come in. Okay, moving on to the household tab. This is looking great. So this looks complete. You've got a male single parent household. You've added the additional household member, and I can tell that you circled back to Camilla's record and added her information, because if you hadn't, this age would be blank. So as the trainer, this is something that you guys will be looking for. If this is blank, it means they did not go back and add any of the information required for the additional household members. So that's oftentimes one of the ways you can spot check that. This is also where I would explain how to change or manage the household composition if it were to change. That's a little next level for the new user training. So Philip, if in the future you were to talk to Mario Lopez and he were to tell you maybe he has a new partner that will be joining the household and working towards housing together, sorry, I'm gross. You will simply click this Manage Household button, and this is going to be a similar screen that you saw when you created the household. You're looking to this button here if you want to add someone, and if you want to remove someone from the household, I'll show you what it looks like, but we won't actually go through it So let's say Camilla's actually going to be staying with a family member for a while. They're not going to be working towards housing with you. You can click this little red button and you'll see Leave Household will pop up. You would add the date the client left household, save, and they would be removed from the household. At that point, you would also need to update the entry and remove that person from the program entry as well. We do have some extra guidance for how to do that. There's a Loom video and some written instructions on our Weebly site. So when and if that ever comes up, make sure you refer to that. But excellent job, this looks great. All right, moving on to the Release of Information tab. This looks wonderful. This is very commonly not done correctly, so A+. As the trainer, the most important thing that you're looking for here is that this universal ROI is tagged. So this is what is going to give the A-OK go-ahead for information to be shared in HMIS. If you did not see this universal ROI tagged, you would expect then to see that the entry information is locked down because at that point it looks as if the client did not give their consent or permission for their information to be shared. But in this instance, this looks great. You've got the universal ROI, which means the client said yes to data sharing. The one last step in real life that you're going to be making sure is complete is that you're going to physically upload the release here. This little binder clip is your file attachment spot, so you would have the physical release uploaded here, so then it's available for any other agency that were to see it in the future. And you know that that's there if there's that little tiny one on top of this binder clip. Okay, great job. Moving on to the entry. So we're going to start with the project start date. This is, okay, so for the trainer, I know this is confusing. For the trainer, this is where I am really going in on the backdate mode because I think this is where they can, after they've practiced it, start to see that there are 3 different time-stamped records here. Philip used the same date, and that's totally fine. In real life, oftentimes this would be one date, this would be later, and then this would be even later. So this is where I really tried to help solidify the concept of the backdate mode and help them understand that this record will be always moving forward what was true at the time that the person entered the program. This is anything that happened after that date, and this is what was true at the time they exited. So, Philip, we are going to start with your entry. So we're going to click on the little pencil here. Excuse me. This looks great. I can see that you added both household members, which is what we want to see anytime that multiple household members are joining the project together. You selected the correct type, which is amazing. And here I can tell that you did have a backdate mode set because you have 12:01 a.m. set. So trainers, this is a great way to see if someone had backdate mode set or not. If they did not, this will be whatever time that they were in HMIS. So that's a great spot checking point to make sure that they actually had their backdate mode set. Okay, we're going to move forward with the entry. And I'm going to go top to bottom. Philip, if you have any questions, use that chat box. Okay, this looks great. As you will have seen, and sort of the joy of data sharing is that anything that's already been added in HMIS is going to pull into this entry for you when you open it. So ideally, this would have been filled in completely for you when you opened it, and that's because you had already added it earlier in the Client Profile tab. This is looking good. Trainers, this is where you're going to make sure that they said something here, and that they HUD verified, and that if they said yes, which we can look at in this next example, that they actually tagged something. I still usually scroll through each type just to make sure that nothing was tagged here as yes if this says no, and vice versa. Sorry. But this looks great. Okay, so this is a great example because Philip said yes for health insurance, so we do want to make sure he actually tagged something. Amazing, he did, so that looks awesome, and he HUD verified. So that's exactly what we're looking for, is that these three components are all complete and that they make sense. Okay, this is left blank, which is correct because your client identified as a male. Perfect. Homeless history questions. This is a great time to sort of reiterate the importance of this section. The homeless history questions help us understand for how long someone has been experiencing homelessness or housing crisis. And at this point, you're trying to make sure that the math sort of works out. So this says they're in a place not meant for habitation, that they've been there for 2 to 6 nights, and that this start date was 2/1/22. So 2 to 6 nights ago, let's see when this was added, 2/23. Okay, so this is a good example because we've got some wonky math here. So if this person said that they've been experiencing homelessness since 2/1, then this would actually be 1 week or more, but less than 1 month. So this math now makes more sense than if you had said 2 to 6 nights. Hopefully that makes sense. Everything else looks great here. Any questions on that, Philip? Does that make sense? Okay, great. Okay, moving on to this income information. Okay, so I see you said yes, you added a source here and you had verified. The one tiny piece that you missed here is adding the monthly total income, which let's see if you added any other sources. You've got $850. Okay, so this feels a little repetitive. The reason that this is here as it exists is so that you can add multiple sources of income if that's necessary for the client or relevant for the client, and then this remains the monthly total. So if they also received VA benefits of $200, this would read as $1,050 and each source would be tagged separately. Otherwise, this looks perfect. Okay, moving on to non-cash benefits. You said yes, and you tagged food stamps, perfect, and you had verified, love it. Domestic violence looks good. Okay, here we've got, so this is one thing, trainers, this is why I recommend that people give themselves a little time in the test client scenario. I think that is confusing. So Philip, what I suspect happened here is that because your interim update was the same date as your start date, you've got both of your current living situations pulling into the start. That's not wrong necessarily, but it can be confusing. So that's why I typically recommend that people give themselves like a week in between the project start date, the interim, and then the exit, just so that there's some real clarity about those different timestamps. That was probably confusing. Okay, Philip, great. This looks good though. All right, next up, we've got the location, which is TN 504, that's accurate. Agency collecting. So this is great because this is going to probably be like a common scenario for you, Philip, is that you put that you're the Metro Homeless Impact Division, but that you did the intake at the rescue mission. That's perfect. Okay, cool. I'm going to save because I did make some edits. I'm going to scroll up. I'm going to mute and cough. Sorry. Let's see if you did the VI stat here or later. Okay, you did it here. Great. So this all looks great. The one thing it looks like you missed is down below here. So I'd like for people to think about this similarly to the release of information. In real life, you did the release, and in this case, you did the VI stat. And this is how we are tagging that it has been completed. This is important for reporting. So once you've done the VI stat, which it looks like you did correctly up here, we're going to scroll down here and we're going to essentially tag that it has been done. So we've got the date of the assessment, the location, which again, you had said the mission, the assessment type, looks like it would have been in person, assessment level. So currently in our community, we use the VI stat as a housing needs assessment. So that's what you're going to select. And then lastly, anytime the VI stat has been completed, that means they are going to be placed on the by name list. So in this case, that is that they've been placed on the prioritization list. And now we can save. And that's what it should look like once that's been completed. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. Alrighty, so this is again where I kind of help the new user identify the difference between the project start and an interim update. So in real life, oftentimes more time has passed. In this case, we have the same date, which is no biggie, but usually this would be that a few days or a couple of weeks have passed by and we're re-interviewing or meeting with our client. To review this, we're going to click on that pencil and check it out. So this is where you would just simply want to update anything that may have changed. This is also where it's super important to keep track of your current living situations. This not only helps us understand sort of how often a person is being seen by a case manager or outreach worker, it's also how we know administratively that a person should still be active in coordinated entry. So as a best practice, we recommend that anytime you interact with a person and can verify where they're currently staying, that you add it. But as a bare minimum, it's every 90 days. So this looks great. You added a second scenario where the person is staying. Excellent job. Okay. Now let's check out your exit. And as a reminder, this is meant to simply be like leaving the record as up to date as possible. So as the trainer, you guys are making sure that the person selected a CE exit if this is coordinated entry workflow, which Philip did correctly, amazing. One thing to note, in the entry and in the interim, additional household members are automatically tagged as part of it. In the exit, the user has to physically click it, which Philip did. But that's one thing to notice too. It's a common error is that people will forget to include additional household members as they exit. All right, moving on to the actual exit assessment. Everything will pull over from the most recently tagged, which in this case would have been the interim update. The only additional questions live at the end of the assessment, and that is exit details, if they were inactive, last known location, or if they were housed. Will they have supportive services, and from who? So that looks good, Philip. Great job. Okay, Philip, that is amazing. You did a really great job. The last little piece that I want to look at is the case manager tab. This is something that we implemented recently. If you didn't add anything, and that's totally fine. This is something, Philip, for you specifically that you'll probably want to talk to Hannah and Sally about. I personally think that anyone working with a person in whatever capacity should go ahead and add themselves, but I don't know if Hannah and Sally will have a different idea about that because I don't know how much like ongoing work that you'll be doing with the folks that you work with. But just as a sort of refresher, if you were going to tag yourself, you're going to click Add Case Manager, include the household, and then you could select Me, and it's going to automatically fill in your information. This is too where if you wanted to include your work cell phone number, up here in the top right corner, this is the settings icon, and if you click on that, something similar to this will pop up. You could add your phone number there, or you could manually add it as well. Awesome. Okay, A plus, A plus plus. I mean, I feel super good, Philip, about you going ahead and adding real client information now. I'm sure more things will come up, more questions will come up for you once you get out there to the mission and everywhere else and start interacting with clients. I would ask that you send the HMIS ID number of the first couple people that you add to the HMIS help desk, just so that the team here can review that and just make sure everything is still looking good. But you have the go ahead now. You're live in HMIS. Any questions about that? I'm sorry about the audio issue and that we can't just chat, but you feel okay about all this? Okay, great. Thanks, Philip. You can hop off, Chantel and TJ, if you can stay on. And then Philip, when you come up here, if you have any thoughts or anything, just come in here in real life. Okay, so I think our Philip and Miranda are only going to be doing coordinated entry, but at this point in the new user training process, it's also really important to make sure to cover any other EDA modes that they're going to be working with. And I usually use their same client and frame it sort of into the big picture. So Philip doesn't actually have any other EDA modes, so I'm going to pretend to be, I don't know, I'll be Megan from our team. But we're pretending this is the same person. He just didn't have any other EDA modes. So this is where it's important to really understand all of the programs and projects that your new user is going to be entering data into. And this is where we would say, okay, let's talk about your other program. Oh, you're a street outreach worker and you're going to need to enter your people in the street outreach. Great, let's talk about it. We're going to use your same test client, but we're going to simply click over to your street outreach program and navigate back to Mario's record. So in real life, coordinated entry is something that is accessed through a street outreach or an emergency shelter interaction. Because coordinated entry is a more comprehensive workflow, it's totally fine if you want to choose to enter someone into coordinated entry first before you move on to document the actual program that you're working with the client in. So in this case, we did go ahead and we did coordinated entry first, but it is really important that we're also documenting that this work actually occurred through a street outreach interaction. So we're going to go back to the same date that you entered the client in coordinated entry because that's the same interaction for street outreach. We're going to set that as our backdate mode. So things can be one of two ways. So if this is the person that you entered into coordinated entry and you can really trust everything that's already in here, it's as simple as going over to the entry exit tab because you just entered all of this information and know that it's accurate. You're going to scroll over here. You've got CE already added, and we're just going to simply add our street outreach work. I believe this is also a standard type, but we'll know for sure in a second. Okay, it is not. This is what you're going to see if it's not a standard type. Just as a reminder, administratively, when we set up projects in HMIS, we have to select a type. Okay. Okay, it's a HUD type. So again, based on data sharing, anything that was previously added that matches one of our elements here is also going to pull forward for us. So that way, all we're doing is really filling in the gaps of any information that's missing. So the first information that we can see that was not in the coordinated entry workflow is this referral source. Coordinated entry, obviously, is if someone was formally referred to you through coordinated entry. You can see lots of other options here. Self-referral is going to be most common for street outreach. This is essentially that you met up with a person and that they wanted to work with you. So if you met someone out and about, this would oftentimes fall into a self-referral. Everything else, again, we just added, so there's nothing else to do, just sort of peeking, making sure I didn't miss anything before. This all looks good. Great. So now at the bottom, here we've come to one other new element. This is called the date of engagement. I want to spend a little extra time talking about the current living situation and our date of engagement, because for street outreach, this current living situation means something a little bit more. This is very specifically going to let us know how many times we have worked with a person. So really every time you've had a street outreach contact with them, you're going to want to document that in the form of a current living situation update. That's super helpful for reporting. And then again, also rather than having to manually keep track of this 90-day time frame, we can simply keep track of real time how often we've met with the person. This date of engagement is a data element that is how we will sort of distinguish people that are actively engaged in our street outreach program and those that we are serving in more of like a transactional way. So for example, if you are working with someone in a camp and you're just sort of going out once a week, I have to pause. If you're seeing them once a week and you're giving them a food bag, maybe some medical supplies, and they're really not interested in working with you in any other capacity beyond that, this is probably not someone that you're going to consider engaged in the street outreach program. So that distinction is also very important for HUD. So any of our federally funded partners, HUD understands that oftentimes street outreach work is only going to be very successful once a rapport or relationship has been built with the person. So HUD is not going to penalize street outreach workers for missing data elements until the state of engagement has been added. The state of engagement will be added at the point in time where the client is more actively engaged in the process of working towards housing or any other type of like formal case management service. I'll also note here that this is a concept that as a community we need more definition around and more clarity as a community around. So to the trainers here, important to continue to work with the street outreach team to continue and further this conversation and make sure that there's a best practice around the state of engagement. So once we have added this, let's say that on the same date, this person was interested in working with us towards housing. They entered coordinated entry, they did the VI SPDAT, that's all very much engaged now in the process. We're gonna add that, we're gonna save and exit, and now we can see that this person is actively open in our street outreach program. Now in moving forward, anytime we work with this person, we are going to want to add, maybe the next day we met with them and we verified that they are still indeed experiencing literal homelessness. So we want to add that current living situation again, always in an interim update. This will again verify that we met with them. So this shows another contact with that person, and it also resets the 90-day countdown. There we go. Okay. TJ and Chantel, any questions about this process? I don't know if I should keep recording or not.
No, I do not. It all makes sense to me.
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.